various places. Obviously, things are getting a little bit more festive. Just a word to the wives, make sure you're nicely zipped up against the cold. Obviously, once we get moving, the wind chill factor will increase. So make sure that you're nice and warm, or as warm as you can be. Also, for your own safety, please no standing up while the bus is moving. We haven't lost anybody yet. We don't want any one of you to be the first to go over the side, so remain seated while the bus is moving. If for whatever reason you want to move forward to sit here if it's too cold for you, then do so once we come to a halt. Also, for those of you who feel you might like an extra layer, we do have blankets for £5. So if you're finding it a little bit tough going, that might be worth investigating. So behind us we have the Ritz Hotel, founded by Cesar Ritz in 1906. He opened the first Ritz Hotel in Paris 8 years prior to that. This is the first major hotel in this country to allow ladies in unchaperoned. Whatever next. They'll be showing their animals. It's also the first building to be built in the UK with an all-steel substructure. And Cesar Ritz was the man who came up with the idea that the customer is always right. Jolly good idea. So to our left here we have Green Park. It's one of 8 royal parks in London. And on the far side of it, 2 royal palaces. Way off in the far side to the left, out of sight, St James's Palace, built by Henry VIII in 1536. To be the new home for his new beautiful Queen Anne Boleyn. She never got the chance to live there, of course. She never got the chance to live
Hi, Kat
on
Joy
Scotland because she had her head chopped off in the
Come with me.
And
Tour po kayo dito sa London.
Inside of Green Park is the other palace, Buckingham Palace. Of course, it's obviously where the Queen lives when she's in London.
Good evening pa rin dito sa London and good morning dyan sa Philippines. Diyan lang kayo at iikot ko kayo dito sa London. Medyo maginaw dito. It's okay. 6 degrees. Ang lamig, diba? Ayan, antayin lang natin na mag-move itong bus. Dito kami sa taas. Kasama ko yung friend ko. Si Nem. Ayan, busy rin siya sa phone niya. Isa rin siyang vlogger. At antay-antay lang tayo. Ayan yung mga bus dito. Ayan. Tagal naman mag-move itong car. Wait lang ha. Ganda ang taas. Yes. Ayan. Marami pa tayong madadaanan mamaya kasi inaantay lang muna natin na mag-move itong bus para iikot ko kayo dito sa buong London. Kaya dyan lang kayo. Magkape-kape muna habang nanonood. Ang tagal. Ang oras pala dito ngayon is like 6:20 or 6:30. Hindi ko siya makita. Oh, it's 7:32 na pala ng gabi.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Ayan na.
we are shortly to depart. Are you looking forward to this tour? Now, of course you are. Are you excited?
Yes!
Are you very excited?
Yes!
All right, calm down. It's only a bus tour. Honestly, getting carried away. Well, listen, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we've got a fantastic tour for you. As I say, wrap up nice and warm. It will give you a great idea what this city is about. And if you're staying for a few days more, you're visiting London, then it'll give you things to think about in terms of where you might like to visit later on in your stay at your leisure. We've just got a late arrival here. This lady's buying a ticket, and then as soon as that's done and she's safely seated, we will be on our way to the nocturnal adventure of a lifetime.
Itong video natin para mapanood ng iba. Thank you. Wait lang, malapit na kami mag-move.
So this charming lady has just joined us and is about to take her seat, and once that happens we will be roaring engines off and we'll be taking off. We should be flying at approximately 17.5 feet. So the doors are closing, the lights are switched off, and off we go.
Ayan na.
Someone just went, woo! Incredible excitement.
Move na kami. Ayan na.
So to our left, as I mentioned before, we have Green Park, one of the 8 royal parks in London. As you can see, it's a park and it's green. Famous for dueling during the 18th century, where gentlemen who felt that their good name had been impugned by somebody else would fight for their honour. And also famed for an assassination attempt on Queen Victoria in the 19th century. Talking of the 19th century, coming up on the right-hand side, this vintage house that is being restored here used to be the residence of Lord Palmerston, a famous British Prime Minister during the Victorian period. Also coming up on the right-hand side, we have the Japanese Embassy. Now we'll be heading towards the Piccadilly underpass, and as we do so, as we descend into it, on the far right-hand corner is the world's first ever hard rock cafe, founded by two American gentlemen in the early 1970s. Rightfully horrified by the standard of British pubs at the time, there are now over 160 hard rock cafes. Don't worry, we'll get there eventually. It's coming up on the right-hand side if you're wondering where it is. It's now over 160 of the hard rock cafes around the world. So if you're not getting chilled, your burger's sizzling and you're not losing out, that's the place to go. There it is on the right-hand corner. Now we're about to gather a little bit of momentum, so hang on to your hats, and if you're not wearing a hat, hang on to your toupee. past. This is Knightsbridge.
Nice
150
bridge.
years ago, it was but a little more than a village. The 1840s. But it's now home to
Oo,
tens of
mahangin.
thousands of
Yes.
luxury mansions, luxury apartments, and of course high-end shopping.
Maingay ba?
World's most famous department store.
Pero naririnig mo ba yung ano ko?
What's coming up on the
Sa salita
right-hand
ko?
side is the Mandarin Oriental Hotel, much favoured by the royal family. It had a facelift about 3.5 years ago. That's the Mandarin Hotel had the facelift, not the royal family. Although Lord knows it probably did. So we held a slap-up do for her grandson, Prince William, just before his marriage to Kate Middleton. They are now, of course, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. Coming up on the left-hand side, we have another
Naririnig
high-end
mo
shop.
yung
Harvey
ano,
Nichols, who back in
yung
the
tour
day
guide?
was oft frequented by the late Princess Diana.
Okay, that's good. Tulog pa yung iba, ano? Sige, manood ka lang ha.
Today you can see the rather festive and colourful open-air display of Harvey Nichols on the left-hand side. Coming up on the right-hand side, we have what our American printer
The
called
left
an
side and the
exclusive
right
piece
side.
of real estate. Number 1, Hyde Park. It's half owned by one of the richest men in the world, the Emir of Qatar.
Uy, ang aga pa pala dyan. Bakit ang aga mo nagising?
It gives a little care to that because this is one of the third largest natural gas reserves in the world. Also vast amounts of petroleum. He owns 7% of the entire London Stock Exchange, 8% of Barclays Bank, and vast amounts of high-end properties in major cities around the world. You could say he's done all the world for himself. Coming up on the ground floor on the right-hand side, you can see the McLaren showroom. So if you like your cars fast, funky and expensive,
Clear ba yung ano, yung pagsasalita ng ano, ng tour guide? Para hindi ko na sasabihin kung ano yung mga nadadaanan namin.
So there's your right. Number 1 Hyde Park. Off to your left there, you get a sneak preview of Harrods, which will be passing later on. And to your immediate right, the McLaren showroom.
Okay, that's good.
Now coming up on the right-hand
Thank
side,
you.
piece of 1970s architecture. This is Hyde Park. It's home to Her Majesty the Queen's Household Cavalry, which consists of 2 senior elite regiments of the British Army, the Life Guards, and the Horse and Royals. Now they've both got battle honours as long as you count, but they're probably best known these days for their ceremonial duties, things like tripping the colour and changing the guard, which they attend resplendent in their Victorian uniforms, whilst on top of their marvellously groomed horses. Now, not surprisingly, next to Hyde Park Barracks, we have Hyde Park itself, the largest of the 8 royal parks in London, weighing in at 625 acres, including Kensington Gardens and Kensington Palace, the birthplace of Queen Victoria and the current residence of the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge.
Oo, gabi na dito pero maliwanag pa rin. Mag 8 o'clock na ng gabi.
Hyde Park was acquired back in the 16th century by Henry VIII so that he might indulge his great passion in life, which was not marrying lots of women, it was of course hunting, although he was so drunk most of the time he probably couldn't tell the difference. Now,
Na-share mo na
about
ba,
400 yards on the
Cathy?
left-hand side, we have one of the world's most
Mag-share
famous
lang
music
lang
venues,
there.
the Royal Albert
Thank
Hall, named
you.
in honour of Queen Victoria's beloved husband, Prince Albert, who died at the tender age of 42 back in 1861 of typhus with complications. She was heartbroken
Thank
by his death and
you.
spent the rest of her reign in mourning. Nevertheless, she laid the foundation stone for the Royal Albert Hall back in 1867 and it opened 71. It's probably best known for the Henrywood Promenade concerts that are held throughout the summer every year, usually referred to as the proms. But all sorts of music is played at the Royal Albert Hall. We've had Elvis Costello, Miles Davis, Eric Clapton has played at the Royal Albert Hall over 200 times.
Traffic.
Now on the far left-hand corner of this junction is the headquarters of the Royal Geographical Society. Its chairman is currently Mr. Michael Palin.
Ang lamig.
And coming up on the wall there you can see a statue of Dr. Livingstone. At least I presume it's him. So coming up here on the left we have the Royal Albert Hall, opened in 1871. And opposite it on the right hand side the magnificent Albert Memorial, opened in 1876. See, it's a beautiful example of Victorian neo-Gothic architecture, the style of the High Middle Ages of Northern Europe, much copied by Victorian architects. There's Albert resplendent in gold, looking at the Royal Albert Hall. We'll be seeing some further examples of Victorian neo-Gothic by way of the Houses of Parliament, which is sometimes referred to as the Palace of Westminster. Built in the 11th century, the Palace of Westminster burnt down in 1834 and was rebuilt in a Victorian neo-Gothic style in the 1850s. We turn right, left, I beg your pardon, into Queen's Gate past the statue of Sir Robert Napier, rather portly gentleman in a military uniform on a horse. He was a famous Victorian field marshal, and you may be able to see here, as far as the eye can see, hundreds, nay thousands, in fact, of houses in this rather elegant off-white you can see to your right there, known as Queen Anne White. This indicates that these properties and indeed the land they stand on are owned by one of the richest men in the world, the Duke of Westminster. Now the Duke of Westminster, as the freeholder, insists that the leaseholders paint the outside of the buildings Queen Anne White. There's only one paint company in the world that officially makes Queen Anne White, and that paint company is owned, you've guessed it, by the Duke of Westminster. Now we're heading towards an area of London, South Kensington, which is famous for its museums. We're rather proud to say as Londoners that a great many of our museums and art galleries are free of charge to get in. So while you're visiting this fascinating historic city, do avail yourself of some of these wonderful institutions. Coming up, we have the Natural History Museum, home to the natural animal world, the Science Museum, and the Victoria and Albert Museum, often referred to simply as the V&A. First up on the left, the Natural History Museum, home to over 70 million exhibits. Its most famous one is that of a 32-metre-long Diplodocus dinosaur skeleton, affectionately known as Dippy. So we turn left into the Cromwell Road and we'll be passing the front of the Natural History Museum. Looking at it, you might be given to thinking it was a beautiful Renaissance palace somewhere in the Loire Valley. Nothing of it at all. Victorian, designed by Aida. Next up on the left, where you can see the festive lights and the merry-go-round, this is the south end of the Science Museum, and all sorts of artifacts connected with the world of science from the earliest times, right the way through the Industrial Revolution, the jet engines, and the space age. My favourite exhibit in here is Puffin Billy, the world's first ever steam engine, or to give it its correct name, choo-choo train. And to complete the triumph at the famous museums along here, the Victoria and Albert Museum, home of the decorative arts and design, and the 4.5 million exhibits in 155 galleries. We've got furniture, we've got jewellery, pottery, all sorts of wonderful costumes. Among the famous exhibits, we've got Henry VIII's writing bureau, the trial notes of Joan of Arc, and that dress worn by Miss Marilyn Monroe. Victoria laid the foundation stone for this museum back in 1899. The museum was finally opened by her son, King Edward VII, in June of 1909. On our left hand we'll have the beautiful Brompton Oratory, the Roman Catholic Church that still conducts full Latin masses. And as we enter the Brompton Road, then you see in all its festive glory, Harrods, arguably the world's most famous department store. It started right along here in the
Ito na yung Harrods. Ito nag-shopping si Elizabeth.
As the area was quickly developed by the Victorians, so more select and expensive, and in the decades, Harrods grew into the world famous department store that we all know and love to shop at. It's up by almost 11,000 light bulbs, has a staff of over 5,000, it has 330 departments, 32 restaurants, and even boasts its very own department store doctor. Now, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, be warned. The only items in Harrods do not have price tags on, so if you go in there, have the mittens on the chance, and fill up your shopping basket with all the things you like to look at, well, when you go to pay your bill, you will need to go and see that department store. So it would be amazing to know now what
We are passing by the Harrods.
Oh, and by the way, it's owned by our dear old chum, the American Qatar. I told you you'd done rather well for yourself. Yes, he bought it back in 2010 for an undisclosed amount that the Al-Fayed family thought to be somewhere in the region of 1.5 billion pounds. Now, if we're looking straight ahead and thinking you're suffering from deja vu, we have come in something of a circle. You can, in fact, see the Mandarin Oriental Hotel. Also a rather splendid restaurant, so it jolly well should do. Its head chef is none other than the world famous Mr. Heston Blumenthal.
Oo.
The name of the restaurant?
Meron talaga dito. Ayan, dyan lang kayo ha, at itutur ko kayo dito. After my work, naisipan ko lang mag-tour, mag-night tour. Kasi dun sa mga iba't ibang lights dito sa London, especially mga Christmas lights. Good morning sa inyo.
And at low tide they were able to ford it, cross the river, and they built a settlement on a mound on the north side. The mound being what we now call Cornhill. And so Londinium, or London as we now call it, was founded. Now on the north side of the river historically there are two famous historic cities. The city of London founded by the Romans, and then just to the west of it The city of Westminster, founded by the Anglo-Saxons around 600 AD. The Romans captured it in 410 AD. Their empire was under threat from the Visigoths, so they retracted all their personnel and their 3 legions to try and fight off the Visigoth hordes. And gradually, the Anglo-Saxons settled in England. And they founded the city of Westminster, which means the church to the west, in other words, to the west of the Roman city of London. So we'll be exploring both of these cities at some length as an integral part of our tour. Bear in mind also that for many centuries London was mainly on the north side of the river, and there was only one bridge across the River Thames, and that was London Bridge. We will also be crossing later on in our tour as London expanded, particularly during the late 18th, 19th and 20th centuries, and the population grew and the area became known as Greater London. So there are now over 30 bridges across the River Thames in Greater London. But for hundreds of years, just the one bridge, until Westminster Bridge became the second bridge across the River Thames in the 1700s. Bridge a tearful farewell. Coming up on the left-hand side by these traffic lights is the French Embassy.
French Embassy. Ganyan ang mga buildings dito.
Now as we go away from Knightsbridge and approach Hyde Park roundabout, on the far right-hand corner coming into view in a moment will be a large white building known as Blessing. This belongs to Queen Anne White, so it's the Duke of Westminster. This building, formerly St George's Hospital, is now the Lanesborough Hotel, one of the 4 most expensive hotels in Europe, and it's still setting you back between £400 a head.
Pinatawa mo to, Kati.
Needless to say, breakfast is not included.
First time mo lang siguro
Parang
kang
na
matutuwa sa mga buildings, pero pag yung matagal-tagal ka na, wala na rin. Parang normal na lang sa'yo.
And that's bringing to a bloody conclusion the Napoleonic Wars. There it is, the Wellington Arch. On top of it, by Adrian Jones, we have the Angel of Peace descending upon the Chariot of War, ironically placed on top of the Wellington Arch in 1912, a mere 2 years before the
Baka
utterly
bukas
brainless
mag-tour din
slaughter of the
ako,
First World War.
mag-bus tour din ako ng daytime naman. So, inuna ko lang to kasi may time ako after mag-work. Yes. Ayan o, Christmas light sa balcony. Christmas light. Oo. Mga hapon siguro. Para mas makita nyo yung ganda ng London.
on the left-hand side, the home of the Dukes of Wellington. If you want to write to the 9th of Wellington, you need only address it number 1, London. That would be the most exclusive address, certainly in London, if not the world. Number 1, London, to your left, the home of the Duke of Wellington. And to your left, we're going to be travelling north along Park Road towards Marble Arch. As we do so, we'll come to the right now, you'll see the London Hilton Hotel Park Road. And straight ahead here we have the Queen Mum gates. Queen Mother was built to commemorate her 90th birthday. Next to here we have the statue of Achilles, another tribute to Wellington's warrior-like qualities. To your left, the scene of the omnipresent Hyde Park, getting its name from the manor of Aida back in Anglo-Saxon times. We have a winter fair here at the moment.
Hindi ko alam kasi ilang floor yun.
Christmas period just into the new year. This is also the part of the park where they hold the large outdoor
Research natin
in the
bukas.
summer. We've had Phil Collins, we've had Players, the most famous concert to be held over in Hyde Park was in the summer of 1969 when the Rolling Stones held a memorial concert to mourn or celebrate the passing of their former guitarist.
Malinaw ba, Cathy, or blurred?
Attended by over 500,000 people.
Parang blurred yata. That's good. Ayan, Wonderland. Ayan.
Coming up in the Central Reservation, this white edifice is the memorial to animals in war, featuring a pack mule carrying ammunition up to the front presumably, and a riderless horse on the other side. And there, coming into view, we have the Marble Arch.
Balik tayo sa
Originally,
side.
it was outside the front of Buckingham Palace, which was lavishly, extravagantly expanded and developed at hideous cost by George V. His architect and designer was John Nash, who designed this arch. It's based on the Constantine Arch in Rome.
Hi, Lisa. Hello po.
And the south facing
Pati-share na lang po.
was sculpted by a famous Victorian sculptor, George Bailey, who also sculpted
Good morning sa inyo.
Nelson's Column.
Gabi pa lang dito.
To your left is the part of Hyde Park where on Sunday people exercise their right to freedom of speech, Speaker's Corner. Now just here is the spot where there used to be what was a place of execution, the Tyburn tree. Straight ahead of you we have the longest shopping mall in Europe, almost 1.5 miles long. Oxford Street used to be called Tyburn Road, and just here ahead of us on the traffic island was the Tyburn Tree, place of execution from the 1100s right the way through to 1783.
Dito na kami sa
So there you can see the
Oxford
famous Oxford Street
Street.
Christmas lights.
Dito makikita
All glitter
ang
on the
mga
globe.
different kinds of Christmas light.
Now,
Look
huge
at
swathes of fashionable areas of central London are owned by the Duke of Westminster, one of the richest men in the world. This area coming up on the left, Mayfair, is owned by him, or a large amount of it anyway. The family name of the Dukes of Westminster, Grosvenor. You may have heard of Grosvenor House, which is the former American embassy, or Grosvenor Hotel, Grosvenor Square. Well, named after the Grosvenor family. Ross was known in Northern French for the great warrior or great hunter. They came over with William the Conqueror. He won the Battle of Hastings and became King of England, and the Grosvenors were richly rewarded. They've been powerful land barons ever since. Coming up on the left-hand side, you have the car showroom of the car of choice of Mr. James Bond, Aston Martin. I'm reliably informed these cars have been converted before Robin Hood. Something to do with health and safety, no doubt. So coming up, ahead of us on the left-hand side, we have the Grosvenor Hotel, which was the military headquarters of General Eisenhower during the Second World War. The entire hotel, there it is coming up on the left, is covered in camouflage. Each military headquarters were in the basement near the garages. The Grosvenor Hotel, and we head towards the 1930s elegance of Dorchester. Favoured by celebrities, and in particular actors, famous American, British American actress, Elizabeth Taylor, part of the before of remains in the Dorchester Hotel, and we're reliably informed that's why they put the revolving doors in. So now if you look over your left shoulder, you get a view of the frontage of the Dorchester Hotel. Wouldn't look out of place on the seafront, the Riviera in the south of France. As a complete out trio of famous park-run hotels. Coming up on the left, the Hilton Hotel. So we're back at the Wellington Arch. Straight to Second World War Memorial to Common Command. On it is the inscription, "Freedom is the sure possession of those alone who have the courage to defend it." Straight ahead, a brick wall. No ordinary brick wall be this. This is the wall that surrounds Buckingham Palace, home to Her Majesty the Queen. As you can see, copious amounts of barbed wire on top, presumably to keep Prince Andrew out. Buckingham Palace was acquired by George III from the estate of the Duke of Buckingham in Normandy.
Partial ka
In
dito, Kati.
1762 for £28,000 as a birthday present to his queen show. Well, she must have loved the present, and she certainly, definitely must have loved him, because they had 14 of their 15 children born at Buckingham Palace. Can you imagine? 15 children.
Bahan ko bukas ang umalis sa bahay para
That's why the Queen is on holiday in
hindi
Scotland.
masyadong late sa inyo.
The palace is opened up to the public, and for a few people who are not, the palace is on the lawn. Now the Roman Hills to see in the palace is actually the royal stables where they keep and host
Medyo madilim
the
dito.
elegant royal carriages and coaches, in particular the coronation coach of George III, which is wonderfully ornate and really is the only way to travel. Unless, of course, you're lucky enough to be travelling with Sea London by night, which you are, you lucky devils. Moving on, coming up on the left-hand side, these rather austere-looking Georgian outhouses. There's some of the 600 or so staff who work at Buckingham Palace at their apartments. This would include the likes of butlers, footmen, page boys, bed boys, secretaries, cooks, chefs, stable boys, and unstable boys. So the royal stables to the left. This is where they also train the carriage horses, which takes about 2.5 years. And it's the only part of Paris that is open pretty much all year round. Now straight ahead of us, on the other side of this junction, we're moving into an area called Victoria, named of course after Queen Victoria. Victoria Station is diagonally off to our right about 200 yards away. Now look up to the left, you might get a glimpse of the tower of Westminster Cathedral. Now Westminster Cathedral was designed by John Francis Bentley, completed in 1903 but not consecrated until 1910. But it's the headquarters of the Roman Catholic Church in England and Wales, and looks like a beautiful Byzantine palace. So it's going to be coming up on the right-hand side just as we pass through these traffic lights. There it is to the right. Westminster Cathedral, headquarters of the Roman Catholic Church. It was visited by Queen Elizabeth in her Jubilee year of 1977, and she became the first woman in this country to visit the establishment since the Reformation. This is Victoria Street, and rather fittingly by these traffic lights on the left-hand corner is a beautiful example of a Victorian pub, fittingly called the Albert, named after, of course, Victoria's husband, Prince Albert. Now we're heading towards Westminster Abbey, Parliament Square and the Houses of Parliament. Westminster Abbey was founded on the spot near the Thames where an Anglo-Saxon fisherman had a vision of St. Peter. Indeed, the full name of the abbey is the Collegiate Church of St. Peter at Westminster. And it is neither a cathedral nor is it any longer a working abbey. There's no monastery there. It's what's known as a royal peculiar. It has no bishop or archbishop as its head. It has the head of state, Her Majesty the Queen. Well, kings and queens have been crowned here since 1066. The Great Queen of the Nile here as well. Over 3,300 tombs, including people like Geoffrey Chaucer, Sarah Sidney's Queen Elizabeth I, Sir Isaac Newton, Lawrence Llewellyn.
Actually, mas mataas pa yung mga buildings doon sa Hong Kong kaysa dito.
This is the second abbey on this site. The first one built during the reign of Edward the Confessor. This abbey work started
Westminster
in the reign of
Abbey.
Henry III, 1245 AD, and was completed 500 years later in 1745. In fact, the twin white towers there you can see designed by Thomas Whitmore. He was famously Christopher Wren's assistant in helping him to rebuild St Paul's Cathedral after the Great Fire of London. Now, just in front of the Abbey, on the right-hand side, this sandstone building, this is the entrance to Westminster School. One of the top public schools, or private schools, whichever one you want to use, in the country. In fact, Christopher Wren was educated there. In a long history. His patron was Queen Elizabeth I. It's opposite the House of Commons, and it's the parish church of the House of Commons in 1614. It's just going to Crown. Straight ahead, Parliament Square, home to some very famous wooden statues. Straight ahead of us, we have Nelson Mandela, also a particular hero of mine, Mahatma Gandhi, and the first female suffragette, just to Churchill, Britain's World War II wartime leader. Now there you can see the Houses of Parliament. On the far right we have the Victoria Tower and the House of Lords, and then from the centre to the left we have the House of Commons with its 650 duly elected idiots, members of Parliament, sorry. And we have this tower here, with the Queen Elizabeth Tower, and with it we have the 13.5
House of Parliament.
Big Ben, which is the bell named after Sir Benjamin Hall. The Commissioner of Works responsible for building the tower. Now straight ahead we have Westminster Bridge. Remember I said this was the second bridge to be built. Well, this is the second Westminster Bridge. The first one built in 1750. The engineer didn't do his sums very well. Slowly sank into the Thames, so they needed to build another one, and this was opened on the 4th of May 1862. And at the front of it, on the left-hand side there, you can see Thomas Thornycroft's famous statue of Queen Boadicea in her war chariot with her two daughters. Boadicea, who took on the might of the Roman Empire, she defeated the Roman legion at Colchester, came down, sacked Londinium in 60 AD, and then gave battle somewhere north of London. And though heavily outnumbering the Romans 10-1, they were boxed in by their own chariots and were slaughtered. Subsequently, Boadicea and her daughters committed suicide. Well, on the south bank there, off to the left, you can see the Millennium Wheel, as it used to be known. It was built to celebrate the year 2000. It was only supposed to be there for a year or so. But it's proved so popular as a tourist attraction, they've kept it there. It has 32 capsules, each one representing one of the 32 London boroughs that make up Greater London, and rather like Central and South America in the 1960s, it has a revolution every 28 minutes. This building, lit up in blue and purple, is the famous County Hall. First opened in 1922, it became the headquarters of the Greater London Council, the GLC, famously and controversially abolished by Margaret Thatcher in 1986. The building is now home to, amongst other things, a Marriott Hotel, the London Dungeon and the London Aquarium. It also has a rather splendid sushi bar. I often wonder where they get their fish from. Coming up here on the right-hand side, the famous St Thomas's Hospital opened in 1871. It's also famed as being the place where Florence Nightingale had her first ever school of nursing. So there it is, St Thomas's on the right, County Hill to your left. We're going to be turning left into an area now called Waterloo. We're out of the city of Westminster. We're on the south bank of the River Thames. This area known as Waterloo after that famous battle that ended the Napoleonic Wars. And as we approach these traffic lights coming up on the right-hand side, you'll get a view of part of Waterloo Station. First opened in 1848 during the age of steam and the Industrial Revolution. It was rebuilt 5 years later. It was knocked down in 1900 to 1922, where they built the massive concourse that now houses all the stations and platforms. It's where Eurostar used to operate from until 2007. That now leaves from St Pancras Station in North London, taking passengers over to Brussels and Paris via the Channel Tunnel. Straight above us, a large white sign with the building seen in the middle of the road. This is the London IMAX Cinema, which houses the largest cinema screen in Europe, 5 times the size of the London double-decker bus. It has all the very latest audio-visual technology. It's the place to see any film with special effects. Personally, I prefer Donald Duck. To your right, you can see the original Northern entrance to Waterloo Station, which interestingly enough is the country's busiest station, handling around 100 million passengers every year. We're now going to turn left and crossing over Waterloo Bridge, from which there is a unique view of our two cities on the north side. On the heading to the left, seeing Westminster founded by the Anglo-Saxons around 600 AD, and that's the central government with the Houses of Parliament and all of its civil service buildings, but also the centre of entertainment we have, the West Bank, with its 50 or so world-class theatres, hundreds of cinemas, restaurants, nightclubs, Chinatown and the Royal Opera House. And then on the north side, to the right, we have the City of London, founded by the Romans, very much the centre of finance and economics, with the Bank of England, the Royal Exchange, Stock Exchange, and all the big financial institutions. To our right and left here we have what's known as the South Bank, the Royal Festival Hall, National Theatre, very much a hub for the arts. So as we cross over the bridge, straight ahead and to the left on the north side, City of Westminster. And to our right you can see the mighty dome of St Paul's Cathedral, and behind it the steel and brass temples of Western capitalism, the City of London, founded by the Romans in AD 43. Or as Dick Van Dyke might put it, to your right is where they makes the money, and to your left is where they spends the money. Now if you look north to the left on the embankment there you can see Cleopatra's Needle, which remains Pharaoh Tutmosis III was part of the 15th dynasty, but I guess you already knew that Now this charming building on the right-hand side, Somerset House, designed by William Chambers, opened in 1776. It was the first bespoke administrative centre of the Georgian period. It had nasty things in it like the War Office, the Navy Office, and even worse, the Tax Office. These days, massively, it is I mentioned that the Romans came across this area in the NOV.21 video, but it was a wide, shallow, marshy river. To give you an idea how wide it was at this point, Crossing our path here is Strand, and Strand is where the Vikings would have parked up their longships when they landed and settled in London in the winter of 870 AD. Straight ahead there you can see the Lyceum Theatre showing the Lion King. They've obviously blocked the road off. If you had walked through there, not only would you be heading towards Theatreland, you'd pass the Royal Opera House, Covent Garden and Chinatown. So we cross the Strand and enter an equally curiously named street, both which is Anglo-Saxon for the old market town. As we head towards the city of London. Coming up on the right-hand side, we'll have the Indian High Commission, a real welcome to our coming on from that lovely country. In fact, wherever you're from, welcome aboard See London by Night. We hope you're enjoying the tour. To our left here, we have the Waldorf Hotel, designed by Alexander Marshall Mackenzie. Famously for its famed for its tea dances, and the ballroom designed by the same person who designed the main ballroom on the Titanic. In fact, there's shot scenes from the film Titanic in the Waldorf Hotel, which I understand does a rather splendid iceberg lettuce salad. Now, just coming up on the right-hand side, we have Bush House, the former headquarters of the BBC, and straight ahead, as we follow the road round its natural crescent or curve, we have about 300 yards away, or 200 yards away, the London School of Economics, otherwise known as the LSE. Now, famous past students of the LSE, John F. Kennedy, Bill Clinton, and Mick Jagger of the Rolling Stones. Otherwise, I stuck Mick right there because he thought it was LSD. No laughing now. On the left-hand side, the London School of Economics, and on the right-hand side, Australia House, where the Gringotts bank scenes from the Harry Potter films were shot. Straight ahead of us, we have a statue of William Ewart Gladstone, a famous Victorian Liberal Prime Minister, as we call him. Straight ahead of us, this charming chapel is St Clement Danes of the children's nursery rhyme playing oranges and lemons, sing the bells of St Clement's. You'll notice the stonework is pockmarked from the damage done during the Blitz during the Second World War. St Clement Danes, the most famous parishioner, has a statue just coming up on the right-hand side. Dr. Samuel Johnson, essayist, critic and compiler of the world's first English dictionary. Yet more Victorian neo-Gothic architecture here coming up, designed by Sir Edmund Street, opened in 1882. These are the Royal Courts of Justice, the High Courts, Civil Courts, where all the big civil cases are heard. And in the middle of the street we have the famous Temple Bar. This marks the border between our two cities. Ladies and gentlemen, we are leaving the city of Westminster. We are now in the city of London, founded by the Romans, and indeed we are entering one of its many famous streets. This is Fleet Street, ladies and gentlemen. When it is gone through such a road to Fleet Street, people will automatically assume you were a journalist. All the major national daily newspapers had their headquarters in Fleet Street, including the Thunderer, known as the Times. Oxford Street gets its name from an underground river at the very bottom of the street here, the River Fleet, which flows from Amsterdam down into the River Thames. It's these days it's like a lot of these small rivers that flow to the Thames. It's an underground river. Coming up on the left-hand side, one of London's very famous pubs, the Churches, frequented back in the day by Charles Dickens, and Dr. Samuel Johnson. Straight ahead, you can see the mighty dome of St Paul's Cathedral. St Paul's rightly regarded as Christopher Wren's masterpiece. The Great Fire of London in 1666 destroyed 80% of the entire city of London, including St Paul's Cathedral, the medieval Norman cathedral. It took 35 years for Wren to build. It's 365 feet high and the dome weighs a staggering 62,000 tons. Now this junction here is known as Ludgate Circus. On the other side would have been the Ludgate, and either side of it the old Roman wall, which was much modified and repaired over the centuries, finally being taken down, most of it anyway, during the Georgian period. So the Great Fire of London destroyed 13,500 homes, countless numbers of civic buildings, palaces and places of worship, 27 churches, including St Paul's Cathedral. When rebuilt St Paul's on a completely new design, and also in the Baroque style, he replaced 51 of the 87 parish churches that were destroyed. Now, as we approach the cathedral, you'll see a statue of a lady at the foot of the steps. This is Queen Anne, last of the Stuart monarchs to reign over England and Scotland. She was made the first Queen of Great Britain and was on the throne when this cathedral was consecrated in 1710. Her woman died in 1740, having had 18 miscarriages, and without knowing it, went to a distant Protestant pageant. George the Elector of Canada is currently George I of Great Britain. Could not speak a single word of English. So there's the hapless Anne and behind it the mighty St Paul's. There are 3 bells, by the way, in the bell chamber. The largest of which is Great Tom, which is the bell that sounds the hour, and the knell at state funerals. Now, the Great Fire of London was an absolute disaster, as you might well imagine, destroying over 80% of the square mile at the time. They needed to rebuild as quickly as possible. Wren wanted to completely redesign the layout on a grid system similar to Paris.
At least nakita mo na.
Simply wasn't time, so they stuck to the
London
same
by night.
And that is why today the street layout of London is pretty much similar to what it would have been during medieval times. So when you think of the city of London, think of the city within a city. It has its own mayor, the Lord Mayor of the City of London, its own separate police force, its own separate executive and administration and traditions that go back to the time of William the Conqueror and beyond. And so when you're rumbling along these roads, bear in mind, a great many of them are hundreds, if not 2,000 years old. We're now going into Queen Victoria Street, which brand spanking new, built and opened in 1861. And this will take us to the very heart of the financial district of the City of London. At the bottom of this street we have the Bank of England, the Royal Exchange, which is no longer the site of the Stock Exchange, and also the Mansion House, which is the official residence of the Lord Mayor of the City of London. The Lord Mayor holds office from November to November, just 1 year, and it is an unpaid post. He's chosen for the greater good of the 24 city aldermen. So straight ahead, this portico building you can see is the Royal Exchange. This is the 3rd Royal Exchange on this site. The first one having had the foundation stone laid by Thomas Grisham, who was an Elizabethan financier who was responsible for putting London on the map as a financial and banking centre to compete with the likes at the time of Antwerp, Amsterdam and Venice.
Parang nag-tour ka na rin.
And this building coming up on the right with big lanterns outside, that is the Mansion House where the Lord Mayor of the City of London lives.
Bukas ulit.
outside of these lights coming up is the Bank of England. It started
yung
right
mga
in the
may
Guildhall,
cities
some
nyo.
500 yards to the left of us. It moved to this current site in 1734.
Yeah,
And
Chatty
issued its first
Assis.
state
Hi,
notes
good
in
morning.
1725. So then you
Good
can see this is
evening,
where
Guido.
please go down there and go to the ground floor. I'm sure you need to wonder why. She's also known as the Great
Nag-night tour lang ako after my work. Yan, manood lang kayo. Iniikot ko ang buong London.
Straight ahead, you'll see the top of Christopher Wren's
1 hour ago na.
London. The monument 210 feet high, 300
Super lamig, 6 degrees.
To the very top, means permitting, and give you a wonderful view over the city of London. We're approaching London Bridge. Now there have been 5 London bridges during 2,000-year history of this city. The first one would have been a fairly rudimentary wooden affair built over a much wider river and much shallower river. The famous London Bridge, built during the reign of Henry II, lasted over 600 years, finally being replaced by John Henry's late Georgian Bridge of 1831. This, in turn, was replaced by the bridge we crossed over tonight, which was opened in 1974. The current organisation bought the John Rennie Bridge for £2 million, and it now features at Lake Havasu near the Arizona border. To your left, you'll get a closer view of Christopher Wren's monument as we cross over London Bridge. Now, if you look straight ahead, slightly to the right, you'll see Southwark Cathedral, the oldest existing original cathedral dating back to 1104. Look up, you'll see the Shard, the tallest building in Europe, 95% If you look to the left, the real jewel in the crown is Tower Bridge. Isn't she a beauty? She's a bascule bridge, which means she opened up in the middle in 1894 to allow tour ships into this part of the Port of London, which back then would have been very much part of the working Port of London, when Britannia ruled the waves and London was the centre of a great global empire. The warship you can see there, the light cruiser HMS Belfast, saw action at the D-Day landings off the coast of Normandy in June of 1944. We cross over into the notorious London borough of Southwark. Now remember, the medieval times, the only bridge across the River Thames was London Bridge. Criminals hot-footing it over London Bridge to escape the clutches of the authorities would hide out in the dark, dank, marshy villages of Southwark. So it always had a reputation for criminality. But also, it's where the Elizabethans founded their equivalent of the West End. Here, just to your right, you would have found the Rose Theatre, Shakespeare's Globe, the Bear-Baiting Arena, taverns aplenty, gaming houses, and houses of ill repute. Now, during the late 18th, 19th and 20th century, there would have been a rough and ready hive of activity. There would have been the London Docks, which were an integral part of London life since London began. But all along here would have been wharves and warehouses aplenty. That all changed in the 1960s when containerisation revolutionised the way things were shipped around the world. The houses, containers and indeed mechanic ships that carried them who needed to build a brand new port 7 miles downriver at Tilbury. And once that was up and running, gradually, one by one, the old docks closed until the last dock, the Royal Dock, closed in 1982. These areas became derelict, rather woeful places, but in the interceding decades, financial initiatives have meant old buildings have had new leases of life, and new buildings have gone up, and a lot of these areas are now thriving. For example, to your right, the wonderful new London Bridge Station, and to your left, an old warehouse which is now a shopping centre. Coming up on the right-hand side, the Shipwrights Arms, a beautiful example of a Victorian bullseye. A great many of them closed down. They were, back in the day, places of entertainment and a hub of socialising. As we head towards Tower Bridge, we'll be crossing very shortly, and as we do so, coming into view will be the one and only Tower of London. Built by William the Faithful. William, Duke of Normandy as he was, came over to seize the power of England. He defeated the Anglo-Saxon armies of King Harold at the Battle of Hastings. In 1066, and on Christmas Day of that year he was crowned king. William I of England in Westminster Abbey. He built the Tower of London to intimidate and impress his new subjects, but also to protect the capital city of his new kingdom. Now, coming up on the left-hand side, a large modern building that looks like a badly wrapped up Easter egg. This is City Hall, home to the GLA, and Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, not to be confused with the Lord Mayor of the City of London. That is a different geezer altogether. So we'll be crossing over Tower Bridge, designed by Sir Horace Jones. It took about 9.5 years to 10 years to build. It opened in 1894, literally for the first time. Each bastion weighs 1,000 tons. They originally were raised by hydraulic drivers, water pressure drivers, designed by Baron Armstrong. Those were decommissioned in good working order in 1974 and replaced by electro-hydraulic drivers. The bridge spans some 802 feet, and needless to say, like most things these days, it's totally computerized. But you want to get a tour, you can get a decent tour around there. They'll tell you the guts of it and the history of how it was built, and give you a great view over the River Thames. So here it is, coming into view again, another example of Victorian neo-Gothic architecture in 1910. The Tower of London, the centre part of the White Tower, was made of paved stone, built especially over from London, and was completed during the lifetime of William I.
Thank you.
The second two walls, the second and third walls, were built during the reign of Henry III and Edward I, featuring many things in its long and illustrious career.
Nandito na kami sa Tower of London.
There's also a fortress and armor. It's made of pencil, black marble, entertainment, something of a tree as well, all sorts of exotic animals given to the kings and queens of this country. Elizabeth I was incarcerated here for some weeks in 1554 by her Roman Catholic half-sister Queen Mary I, sometimes referred to as Queen Mary. So Walter Raleigh wrote his history of the world from 1603 to 1616. Incarcerated there for 12.5 years. Well, Robert Pest, the second in command, had been third right of his imprisoned during the Second World War, and also Henry VIII had two of his wives, Queen Anne Boleyn and Queen Catherine Howard, were both beheaded in what was to be called the Bloody Tower.
Yes. London Tower. Kanina yung London Bridge na daanan na.
Juxtaposition in the background behind the towering modernity of the Shard, 95% owned by the American Tower, and in the foreground the €1,000 palace of the Tower of London, 100% owned by Her Majesty the Queen. Now, if you're looking forward as part of your London experience to being executed in the Tower, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but that's not going to happen. Nothing to do with health and safety or human rights, it's just that you had to be of royal or noble blood to be executed there. Commoners like ourselves, we will be executed straight ahead on Tower Hill.
8:40 na ng gabi
Also,
pala.
it's where we will find the 37 Yeoman Warders, who are sometimes referred to as beefeaters. They are full of knowledge and, of course, they help protect the crown jewels. I strongly recommend a morning well spent here will be memorable. It's steeped in history. The Yeoman Warders are a good fun and also a font of English knowledge, and it really is a fascinating
Bukas
place to visit.
mag-tour din, mag-day tour din ako.
Now, straight ahead of us, we have one of the many historic churches of the City of London. This is All Hallows by the Tower. Its origins go back to Anglo-Saxon times. It was still got an arch as part of the building that dates back to 675 AD. It's been rebuilt, obviously, several times over the centuries. But this church escaped the Great Fire of London.
Sige lang, Kati. Thank
Still
you
strong
for
American history as well.
watching.
William Penn, the founder of Pennsylvania, was baptized in this church. And John Quincy Adams, no less, the sixth President of the United States of America, was married in this free church going up on the left. Perhaps it's due deference to its strong
Enjoy
American
your
connection.
coffee.
It's the reason why they put a Kentucky Fried Chicken shop right next door. History has never been so finger-licking good. This rather than a nice-looking building straight ahead is the old custom house. Generations back, ships sailing up the river Thames would stop up here to pay their import duties. And on the other side of these lights here is the old Queensgate Fish Market. There's been a fish market here since the 1400s. Queensgate finally closed down on the 16th of January 1982. A lot of the old markets gave a lot of London its character, and alas, a great many of them have gone, including Covent Garden Market in the centre of town. Coming up here on the left-hand side, St Magnus the Martyr was rebuilt by Christopher Wren after the Great Fire. It cost £9,579, 19 shillings and 10 pence. It's also the final resting place of a gentleman called Thomas Fowler, who was the royal baker responsible for starting the Great Fire of London in the King Church. Also buried on that church, Miles Coverdale, the gentleman who was translated the Bible into English for the first time. Now this area being very close proximity to the docks, during the Second World War, there were absolute smoking in the tunnel, and also rather ironically, a lot of Christopher Wren's beautiful Baroque churches have been built to replace the ones destroyed by the Great Fire of London of 1666, were in turn damaged or destroyed by the Blitz.
Ano yun? Sabi mo, Kati? Hindi ko nabasa.
This is the church where Dick Whittington, 3 times Lord Mayor of London, was brought down in 1823. Now we've seen quite a variety of architecture so far. No shortage of Victorian neo-Gothic architecture, that's for sure. Also the beautiful Baroque churches of St Paul's et al.
Good morning, good morning.
Christopher Wren.
Mga bagong
So
pasok.
medieval power of the Tower of London. But we also
Grabe,
see
hindi na
sort of the
nakakalaga.
of the City of London institutions. For those of you who like a bit of modern architecture, coming up with our real trees next door for you. To your right, a concrete wall.
Ayan, nasa kami. Wait lang po.
Station designed by Gilbert Scott, which provided London with electricity in the 1890s onwards. It was decommissioned in the 1980s and is now home to the Tate Modern Art Gallery. And now on the embankment. Now these embankments are Victoria embankment on the north side and the Parliament embankment on the south side. They went between 1865 and 1871 by a very famous Victorian civil engineer Johnson Bazalgette. This greatly narrowed the River Thames now as a tidal river and rolls back in the bay, horribly polluted with sewage and industrial waste. This made the River Thames a really filthy and really quite smelly place. But the embankments narrowed the River Thames quite considerably, and this helped to flush it out because it's a tidal river. We're proud to say, however, these days it's one of the cleanest metropolitan rivers in Western Europe. Over 200 species of fish have returned after a rather smelly spell. Here's your tower on top of the old Octo factory that used to make the old Octo queue. Not any longer, of course, it's been converted into flats and a rather slighted restaurant. It's around White Temple Gardens. Now, a lot of people assume there was a Roman temple there. Not a bit of it. In fact, in the middle is an ancient church, which was the headquarters of the Knights Templars. The Knights Templars were very wealthy, powerful knights who had made a lot of money out of the Crusades and became bankers, and it was proved to be their downfall. They were lending money to Charles, the King of France. He couldn't pay them back, so he cooked up something with the Pope to have them accused of heresy, and they were all rounded up. And eventually, Jacques Malay was the leader, was burnt at the stake outside Notre Dame Cathedral. Not that we'd want to be doing that today, Mr. Dollar, of course. So if you look to the left hand, you'll see the National Theatre advertising its wares. As we approach a bridge that we crossed over earlier on in our tour, Waterloo Bridge is sometimes affectionately known as the Ladies' Bridge. It was built by the women of London during the Second World War in 1941. Then, take note, it came on time and under budget. You look across the river there, you can see the Royal Festival all opened in 1951. It's kind of a festival ready to raise people's spirits after the horrors of the Second World War. Coming up here, the Sea River to your left. Cleopatra's Wall. Get a closer view of it here. Spot the deliberate mistake. But the Sphinx is in the wrong way round. They should be facing outward to protect the Sphinx from to protect the obelisk rather from evil spirits. Famously NOV was founded at the beginning of the 20th century. Also coming up on the right hand side, the Ministry of Defence. All 12 floors of it, I'm reliably informed it goes below ground at least twice that many floors, or terribly hush hush runs the word. Coming up on this side of the river to the left, we have the memorial to the Royal Air Force. And a splendid side-on view of the London Eye. Now coming up on the right-hand side we have the new Scotland Yard, which replaced the old New Scotland Yard, which replaced Scotland Yard, which was in Great Scotland Yard.
New Scotland Yard.
So here we are back at the north side of Westminster Bridge at the Palace of Westminster. So cool because William the Conqueror's son, William Rufus, his second eldest son, took over from the Conqueror as king, and he built his palace in this area here, ahead of us. This burned down in 1834. This current building, designed by Sir Charles Barry, opened up in the 1850s, with the tower being completed in 1856. Then, to survive the fire of 1834, it's coming up on the left-hand side. This bit looks a bit like a church, coming up any second now on the left. That's where Charles I was put on trial after the Royalists lost the English Civil War. He was found guilty of treason and was executed in the road coming up right in Whitehall on the 30th of January 1649. He declared, "I go from a corruptible to an incorruptible crown." So right to our left, all that remains of the 11th century Palace of Westminster, Westminster Hall. used to be where the Royal Courts of Justice were until the Edmund Street's building opened in 1882. So this is the right door, and it's
Magkakape kayo. Manood na lang muna.
1922 to celebrate the fall during that butcher's yard known as the First World War. Cenotaph is ancient Greek for the open tomb. There are no religious symbols on the cenotaph, and it's the focal point every November of the Remembrance Sunday service. Coming up on the left-hand side is Blackmore Time Gates, Downing Street, built by Lord Downing at the end of the 17th century. 10 Downing Street is, of course, the home of the British Prime Minister, currently Mr Boris Johnson. In the centre of the street here, just here, is the memorial to women in war, and this white building coming up on the right-hand side, all that remains of the largest palace in Europe, which burned down in 1698. This is the banqueting house outside which the left-hand side, first floor window, Charles I was executed in 1649. To your left, designed by William Kent, this is what's Guards Parade, where Tribune de Colour takes place every year. The Household Division parade their colours in front of the Queen to commemorate her official birthday. And straight ahead, another iconic London landmark, Trafalgar Square, in the middle of it, William Granton's Nelson's Column. The Lions were put in place finally until 63 years after the battle. On the 26th of October 1905, Nelson, British Navy, took on the much larger combined fleet of France and Spain and defeated them at the Battle of Trafalgar. Leading from the front, he was famously killed at the hour of victory. There's Nelson's Column. Trafalgar Square, immediately in front of it, you can see a statue of Charles I by Sir, and that he is on his horse looking imperiously down Whitehall as place of execution. On the far side of Trafalgar Square, below that white building, the National Gallery. You won't laugh, you won't be disappointed with this. Over 2,300 masterpieces for you to enjoy, and again free of charge to get in. So with a skin the south side of Trafalgar Square, to our left, we've got the Admiralty Arch, by Sir Aston Gregg.
Trafalgar Square.
Canadian High Commission. This building used to be the headquarters of the White Star Line. His most famous ship was the doomed Titanic. Now we're about to enter a street called Pall Mall, gets its strange name from Palio Amelio, an Italian version of croquet played here by Charles II and his courtiers where they were waiting for their horses to be saddled at the royal stables, which back then, in the 17th century, was where the National Gallery now stands. Pall Mall famous for its gentlemen's clubs, probably the most famous of which is the one on the far left-hand corner here, the Athenaeum Club, famous past members for the Duke of Wellington, Winston Churchill and the marvellous Sir Alec Guinness. To our right we have the Crimean War Memorial. The foremost statue on the left is Florence Nightingale with her team of nurses. Went out to the Crimea in October of 1856 to tend to the wounded and dying soldiers during that
na yung inaantay ko. Ayan, guys.
as indeed most wars ultimately proved to be. So here we get a little sample of the Christmas lights. We're in Lower Regent Street, designed by John Nash. Is officially known as the Angel of Christian Charity upon the Shaftesbury Memorial Fountain. So you get an idea why we call it Eros. It's a lot easier. It's the first statue to be made in this country of aluminium. and we'll be getting a view of it as we get to the top of this street, just a little on the right hand side.
Hello, Leslie.
It said that the silver-headed beneath the statue of Eros that depicts your love will last forever. You can all go, ah. To our left into Piccadilly, which means we're coming towards the end of our tour, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. On behalf of our marvellous driver Steve and myself, Andrew, we would both like to thank you very much for choosing to see London. See London, we hope you've enjoyed the tour and the commentary. Now, if you have, when you're touring, you'd like to make a little London version of our tour, just for fun, let it be known. We do accept tips, anything that you do, anything that's wrong, will be very much appreciated. Coming up on the left-hand side, we have a famous department store. Burton and Mason is where the Queen gets her marmalade and tea from. To your right, we have the Royal Academy of Arts, founded by Joshua Reynolds, and immediately you pass it there, you can see the beautiful Burlington Arcade. Worth a stroll down during the day, lots of bespoke musical shops, but use your favour, keep your wallets and purses firmly in your bags, because the word expensive doesn't even begin to cover it. And lo and behold, far ahead of us is the town where we started our tour. The Ritz lends its name to the word Britsy, meaning the ultimate either bars, opulence and style. The noble Monday will be kept into the Ritz. Tea is a special occasion. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for travelling with us. We hope you've enjoyed it. We trust you enjoy the rest of your evening and indeed your stay in London. Take good care, and may we wish you also all the very best for the festive season. Stay safe, bless you, and mind the stars on the way down. Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching. Bye. Okay, baba na kami. Sorry, hindi ko na ma-turn off yung